The DIESOL podcast.
Developing innovation in English as a second or other language.
Episode 72. 13 scary practices teachers need to stop doing.
Welcome to DIESOL. This is episode 72. We are your hosts. I'm Brent Warner.
And I'm the spirit of Ixchell Reyes.
Ooh. That is super scary.
So what's been going on with you?
We're gonna be sound mixing it up this time around. It is the Halloween episode. Yeah, I'm doing okay. How are you?
Wait, are you done with your 30 days of no social media or stuff?
30 days. Oh no,
Weren't you doing a month?
Well, I'm just keeping on going. I'm not no social media. I just deleted it all from my phone.
Yeah, well, that's pretty much.
I mean, it's significantly less for
sure.
No more doom scrolling for the most part.
No more doom scrolling.
But yeah, it's going well. I'm super happy to not have it all on my phone and to have a lot of those apps and other things off.
The purge.
It was big time, and I don't have any intentions of going back or putting those things back on my phone at this point. We'll see what happens, but for now, I'm feeling pretty good. Other than that, anything exciting going on for you?
Halloween's pretty exciting. I'm trying to choose a Halloween costume, and right now it's between Minnie Mouse and Maleficent.
Nice. Weirdly, those are my same choices too that I'm thinking about trying to get. So.
Oh, you then hands down, you're Minnie Mouse. I'm Maleficent.
Okay, there we go. Yeah, and then also Fall Q is coming up next week.
And where is it taking place?
So speaking of
Tell
scary,
us.
It's in by itself. This is already scary, which is Stockton, California.
No offense to our Stockton fans or the Stockton community.
Okay, no joke though. There is a serial killer in Stockton right now, and it is like kind of gnarly to be going in there. And so my wife's like, "You're not going out at night. Well, as soon as it gets dark, you got to lock yourself in your hotel room and stay until the sun comes out the next day and all this stuff." So I'm like,
and we know that for Fall Q, that's probably not happening because it's all the meetups.
I know. It's like
what are you gonna have with
all the fun
do
stuff
that?
happens. And well, the problem is, so when I signed up, all the hotels were kind of booked out. Like all the local hotels that were part of the conference were kind of booked up, and so I ended up getting one that's like 10 miles down the dirty farm road alone by itself. And I'm like, maybe that's not such a good idea. So I'm going to go back.
Please take an Uber to your destination. Don't try to walk.
I am going to have my own car, so I'll be fine there. So,
great.
Yeah.
When's Fall Q happening?
It is, after the release of this episode, it will be the following weekend. So if you're listening on the 17th when this comes out, it starts on the 22nd and 23rd.
Awesome. So we'll find out if Brent survives Fall Q in the November episode.
Can you imagine how dark it would be if something did happen to me and there were no more
Don't
episodes?
Say that.
I mean,
anyway,
I have a dark sense of humor in a lot of ways, but I'm thinking about that like as a reality. I'm like, oh, that would really be a rough final episode.
The DIESOL podcast. I am your host, Ixchell Reyes, and the spirit of Brent Warner.
See, flipping it on the head. All right, so all sorts of scary things going on, and so we are going to talk about some scary practices, 13 scary practices that teachers need to stop doing.
All right, so these practices are often ones that you and I have talked about before, Brent, or that maybe we've chatted with other colleagues about. And in some cases, from experiences from our own students or from us as students.
Yeah.
that we still see repeated.
Yeah, well, and I'll point out too, like, I just want to be clear for anyone listening. If you do some of these things right now, it does not make you a bad person in any way. Like,
Totally judging you.
Yeah. I am very guilty of some of these, and like I have been aware of them as problems in my own teaching for years and years, but like for whatever reasons I can't break the habit either. So yes, we're judging you, but we're judging ourselves.
Yeah, definitely. Like these are all something that that I personally have to be aware of as well, especially when we're executing one of these strategies.
Yeah.
So with that, scary practice number 1, teachers need to stop creating group projects that aren't well thought out and might end up penalizing a student or placing the burden on a single student.
So what does that mean?
That means, well, first of all, I asked an audience on social media what were some of the scary practices they wanted teachers to stop doing. And I expected my teacher friends to respond, but it was my friends who gave me responses as their experience being students. And the number one thing, and I agree with this because I actually used to I hated group projects. Right. Not having roles that are based on that reflect the strengths of the groups you're assigning means the overachiever might say, oh man, I really don't want to get judged on this, on the lack of support from my team members. So now I have to do the whole thing. And so that actually doesn't lend itself to what the purpose of a group project is. But what a teacher can do is make sure that those roles require different strengths and they're planned ahead of time. And then always have more roles than the number of students in a group. That way nobody gets stuck with something they don't want to do. And perhaps allow students, I don't like being assigned a role, but allow students to choose their role. And then the roles that require more responsibilities and you might want like a particular student being the lead, leave that till the end. So once they've selected a role, then say, okay, now I need, you are the point person in this, for this project, and that way everybody has a role already, and then you're just adding the extra responsibility for the student that can be the point person.
So for sure, and that does take extra planning, because I think one of the nice things for teachers, or it's maybe not the right phrasing, but I think what happens is we're like, oh, group project, great, they can figure it out, right? And then just kind of leave it to the students, and it's one less thing on the teacher's plate, right? And so in a certain way, and so I think that is what ends up happening, is like you guys are just going to figure out how to do this together by yourselves, and like remembering that as teachers, right, as all people, we don't always work together the best in groups, or we don't work together in the most efficient ways until we start assigning roles, and until we start saying like, okay, I'm going to be responsible for this and you're going to be responsible for that. But like many students don't have that kind of training or understanding of how to scaffold their own teamwork, right? And so I think this is a big part of the conversation, that you can actually teach them this the skill at the same time. So yeah, I think that one can be really powerful. Number 2 is taking up too much time speaking rather than letting students do the talking. The sound effect didn't sound good. I'm just gonna leave that.
That's our students. As the teacher keeps
Why
talking,
are you talking so much?
Internally, they're like, ah.
Yeah. So this one is a well-known, the teacher talk time, right? Balancing out the teacher talk time and the student talk time, this goes really well with it's massive in ESL, right? It's like, how much time are you talking versus how much time are the students talking, and so. The idea here is that you want to make sure that you're carefully weighing the time that you spent talking with the students. And usually that goal is about, the goal is 20% teacher talk time, 80% student talk time. That does not always work out, right? Like there are times when you actually need to build and scaffold and kind of help the students get comfortable with what you're talking about before they start their talk time. But I think it's always good to keep in mind as a goal, with the recognition that like that is kind of, a lot of times it is the rare achievement of actually getting to 80%. But if you're saying, hey, I want them to get to 80%, then it's certainly going to push them a lot higher than what does happen, which is the opposite, right? 20% student talk time or 15% student talk time.
Yeah, that's pretty scary. If these students are supposed to be producing, or just think of it, the more you talk, the more you're robbing them of that time they're supposed to have, and that makes you a scary teacher.
Ooh, all right. What's next?
All right, scary practice number 3 is using a film in class without a specific language or cultural purpose, perhaps, that is clear to the students.
Ooh, films in class. Are we using them wrong?
Now, films, of course, are fun, but you do need a rationale that's relevant to the content that you're teaching. So if you're showing a holiday film, yes, that may be fun, but what's the takeaway for the student? What are they going to be applying after they leave your class, after they've seen the film? Are there phrases that you could pre-teach? Are there idioms they're going to be hearing? Is there something that students can be listening for, right? You want them to be still active participants as they're watching a film, and, not to overload them. Of course, a film is an enjoyable part of learning English, but there may be cultural references that students might need to know ahead of the film, which means it does have to be prepared ahead of time.
Yeah. So really thinking those through, right? I think, or I'd like to imagine that the old days of just like, well, of course, rolling in the TV card is not a thing anymore.
Oh gosh,
but
that's a meme now. Please don't be a meme.
Yeah, well,
By saying, "Oh, the teacher's showing us a film."
Yeah, but it's like the day off, and you're just gonna hang out, and there's no real connection to what you're actually talking about, right? So all of those things. But I think the cool thing for a lot of language learners is that there is so much culture hidden and tied into the movies, right? That even if you're not totally focused on specific language focuses, you can still do a lot of cultural teaching through movies and kind of helping people understand things that they might not have seen otherwise. So, I do like the opportunities that come with this.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So next up is letting the textbook guide your teaching.
That's creepy.
Don't
Our
do
poor
it.
listeners are going to be like spooked they're going to be jumpy after this episode.
Well, that's the goal. These are scary practices we need to stop doing. So make you jumpy. So this is kind of, we obviously we've talked about textbooks and things like that. If you're really into this whole, Matt Miller does a whole ditch that textbook thing.
Ditch that textbook, especially instructions that
yeah.
don't always
And I don't have total problems with textbooks. So I don't use textbooks in my classes, but my students are high enough where I can kind of justify that. I was subbing recently for a little bit more of like an intermediate or lower level class, and they were using a text, and I'm like, okay, I can really see how this does help students through a process, but at the same time, I wasn't just going to say, okay, we're starting on page 17 and we're going to finish on page 22, and we're just going to go through one activity at a time, right? So the textbook itself shouldn't guide your teaching. And the way that I kind of approach it is, if you're going to use the textbook, so for example, maybe the chapters or the units are really good, really valuable, or topics that, the students need to learn how to talk about, but that can be a supplement to the things that you're really customizing for your class and things that you are passionate about. So, if the topic is, let's go back to going to the movies, right? There might be a couple of good activities inside of there, and I can pick and choose those ones on top of my own activities that I'm trying to get the students to figure out, or play with things that are more relevant, because a lot of times by the time those textbooks come out, they're like, okay, the planning for this book started 7 years ago, and you're choosing things that are no longer interesting to students, especially with this this instant world that we live in. And so I think there's a lot of things to play around with there potentially.
All right. Scary practice number 5 that teachers need to stop doing is expecting all students to learn grammar with a paradigm. Yes, we know that grammar itself can be pretty scary, but simply expecting a paradigm to do what you think will do for the students rather than offering other ways to experience grammar can actually lead a student to think that there's only one way to learn grammar, but you've got songs, stories, other media, pieces of music, but there are many, many other ways that students can experience grammar and internalize it. So it's not just a paradigm. Paradigms are there to help some students, and we know that the paradigms don't work for everything. So that's my number 5.
Yeah.
Grammar is scary enough. We don't need to go deeper than that.
God, yeah, fair, totally fair. All right. And number 6, treating your adult ELs like children.
Spooky, scary skeletons and shivers down your spine. Shrieking skulls will shock your soul, seal your doom tonight.
Spooky skeletons. So I gotta
We are
admit
not
that kind
children.
of that kid's jam is really hitting the right places for me right now.
I'm glad we can't see you dancing on this end.
Well, you can see it.
I can see it. The audience can't see it.
That would be
Pretty
scary.
scary.
So yeah, this is the, a lot of teachers kind of fall back into like grabbing teachers' resources for kids for ELs, right? And so we've talked about this. I've complained about this in the past, right? It's like
Comic Sans.
yeah, Comic Sans fonts.
Comic Sans. We don't like Comic Sans on this podcast.
Those little, like the those cute graphics that come from Teachers Pay Teachers.
Yeah.
I used to do every month during Halloween. I would do that whole series of the Trash Bail Teachers, right? So you can go back and search for hashtag Trash Bail Teachers.
Or the calligraphy that is hard to read for the students.
Oh yeah. Like all those, the ones that are like on the Target mugs and things like that.
Yes.
Yeah. So all of those kinds of things, right? Are you thinking them through carefully? Like, are they things that you like? For example, if you're a parent of a young child, you might be thinking about your kids a lot, and then bringing that into a class for a student, for a class full of like total professionals. Like, I'm a doctor in my own country, or like I've got all of these degrees in mechanical engineering, right? So are your students into that kids stuff? And there are different parts where it's like, hey, it might be okay, right? Like going through. Going through kids' songs can be easy to understand and to follow along with. It can also be totally culturally relevant. So they can say, oh, okay, this is, we're about the same age. I grew up in another country, but you grew up in America, and this is an American children's song that maybe most people around my age would know or be able to reference. That is totally valuable, right? And so you can see where there are parts of these, but are you choosing it for that and to make sure that they understand those aspects, or is it like just a kid's song that is like simple and easy? You kind of want to balance those things out where you're trying to figure out what is appropriate. Like, simple and easy to access language doesn't mean child's language or approaching to children. And so I think that's a break that a lot of people really need to figure out for themselves.
Yeah, and here's an idea I've had. When we don't have something, it means it doesn't exist, or you don't have access to it. So just build it. Have the students build it. Draw from the students' experience. And then, of course, this takes more time, but then you'll have something that you can reuse or you can pull from.
Right. All right, so quick break. If you are looking for any consultation or training at your institution, we are open up a few limited spots here and there. So feel free to reach out to us. We can help you with some things around developing your team better or interacting with your students. And, you can work with either one of us if you like. And, we're kind of available. We're both fairly busy. So we have had to turn down requests in the past. But if we can make it work, we will certainly want to do it and want to help out. And don't feel afraid to reach out and let us know.
All right. Scary practice number 7. Banning the use of L1.
Yep. Oh.
That's a scary. I thought your voice was the scary sound.
Sorry, I forgot my role is to play sound effects.
So banning the use of L1 when the L1 can be used as a bridge for better content understanding. Now, of course, keeping in mind that the focus is on the additional language. This case, we're talking about English, but you've got to discern when using the L1 is actually going to help you to get through the rest of the L2 or whatever language, whatever language it is for the students, to help you get through the content. Because if you're going to spend 10 minutes trying to get the student to explain something that they don't have the vocabulary for, when you could simply give them the word and you can move on, then that's good use of the L1 as a bridge.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So scary if you ban it. Please, absolutes are just not a good idea.
And speaking of absolutes, number 8, enforcing absolute deadlines with no exceptions.
That's creepy. The deadline creeping up on you. Are you submitting something right at the deadline?
Yeah, just to be clear, like I have not vetted any of these sound effects. I'm just playing around random ones as we go, but it works. So yes, and I am dealing with this a lot right now because I'm playing around with a lot of deadline conversations with my students and like how it works. But deadlines do matter. I really do believe that they do matter in certain ways, but not in all situations, right? And so or hard deadlines are much more rarely needed than kind of softer deadlines, right? You can pick things that are, for example, like, hey, I'm going to be grading this assignment here on Monday afternoon, for example. But a lot of times teachers would make it like Sunday night at midnight it's due. And it's like, well, I'm not going to be grading it until Monday afternoon. So why is the deadline, 12 or 14 hours ahead of that? And they're just going to be sitting there in a repository waiting, right? And then the other thing is like, we kind of want to think about ourselves, right? I'm going to make a strong assumption that everyone here has asked to submit something late at their work or in their own school life, right? Because of a personal emergency. And a lot of times as teachers, we kind of get into this policing spot, right? It's like, are you assuming that the student's emergency isn't real, or like you should be the person to make that determination, when it's really not going to hurt you too much to say, yeah, have an extra day to get this done, right? It's okay. Grading essays, for example, like, hey, here's the deadline. I'm going to get through 10 of them today, and I'm going to get through 10 of them tomorrow and 10 the next day, right? So you might be able to say, like, it's okay to be a little bit loose, or maybe if the students have to reach out. Like, it's not a perfect thing, right? You can set up different systems to make these work, but I would say just no exceptions. In the past, I've had a few teachers that are just like, no, this is absolute deadline. If it's not in on time, you get an F. And it's like, well, does that F then reflect what the student's actual knowledge on the content is, or does it reflect that they just didn't turn something in? And what is your job as the teacher, right? And then, those are things we're all kind of coming into these considerations for recently.
All right, number 9, assuming that students who might challenge a teacher are being disrespectful.
How long is it going on?
Okay, is that someone being disrespectful toward me?
Yeah, that's the sound of a student laughing at you.
Yeah, so, when students, and of course this is going to arise, this has happened to me, when students are challenging the teacher, this could be a time for dialogue. It could also help to break down address any breakdown in communication that might be due to cultural diversity. It's a good time to remember that it might just be that a student is frustrated or that the teacher is frustrated at something. And oftentimes it's because the communication isn't clear. So often, before reacting and assuming that a student's doing it just because they're disrespectful might actually hurt. And it's a chance to build rapport, whether it's for a content point, or maybe the student is saying, well, you never let us use our phones to look for a picture, and I just happen to be looking for a picture of what you're saying. Just think about it.
Right.
Don't assume that it's automatically disrespect.
Yeah, and this is not exactly the same thing, but it reminds me of a time many years ago, and I didn't love this situation, but there was a student discipline issue, right? And and I had to talk to the student about it, and I was caught in my own culture, and he was caught in his own culture. So he was like a Chinese student, and I was talking about the problem, and it was happening over and over again, and I was upset, and unfortunately, so like I said, hey, look at me when I'm talking to you about this, because he kept looking down at the ground, looking down at the ground, looking down at the ground. Then later I realized, in his cultural context, if you're being yelled at, like you should be respectful and looking down. In my cultural context, you should be respectful and looking at me in the eyes and understanding, right? And so then I was the person with the authority and the power there, and so it was like I was breaking the culture. It was like this whole thing, and I felt, I even still today I feel bad about it, because I was like, it was unclear and it wasn't helpful for that situation. But it was about, now I can kind of understand that cultural context and trying to understand it better as well.
So Brent, I think maybe what I would like to rephrase this as more of the scary practice is really not being aware of cultural differences and how they're interpreted, because I just remembered in some cultures, they're more expressive with their bodies. So if they're shaking a finger in front of you, that might mean emphasis on their end, but to us might be a threat, or to a Western from America, in America, a Westerner in America might think, oh, they're threatening me or they're angry. And that might not be it. They're just, it's like bolding a word, right? Right. And so again, that's pretty scary. Can be pretty scary.
Okay, number 10, recycling without reflecting on classroom activities. All right. So, this one, Ixchell, is like, you'll do an activity in class and it kind of works, it kind of doesn't work, it's so-so, and then you put it away and you kind of forget about it until the next time you run the class, and then you bring it back and that same problem comes up again, right? And so I think this happens a lot, right? Because we're busy, things go on, and we're like, okay, I'll take a note and remember to fix that next time. But where is that note, right? What is your technique for making sure that you actually fix it the next time around? And so that can be a big one here. And so that might be a reflection that you missed out on. And then another one is like kind of tied into that is, so for example, if you're looking at an activity that worked, but it's kind of heavy on the teacher talk time, right? So we talked about that for, number 1 or number 2. And so how can you maybe adjust your lessons where you're reflecting on it and going, well, how can I make more student talk time? And I think here, I don't love this example. I just kind of came up with it. But if we're talking about an activity like popcorn reading, which I understand that it has its own problems with popcorn reading, but popcorn reading is where the teacher reads a line and then they call on another student to read a line, and they call on another student to read a line. So, well, if you've got a class of 30 students, that's pretty much at all times, 29 of them are sitting there just listening, and one is speaking out, right? So you could maybe adjust that lesson or just adjust that activity to say, well, hey, let's do baby popcorn groups, right, where you're like in groups of 2 or 3 people, and then at the same time you've got basically 15 students out of the class all reading and all talking at the same time instead of just one, right? And then the time in between while they're waiting is much shorter, so you have them actively working and actively producing language. And so again, popcorn, not the best example, but the concept behind that, right, is I can make an adjustment to the way that I'm running this lesson in order to give more time back to the students and less time for me as the teacher.
Right. Okay, number 11, expecting younger students to be experts with tech.
Okay. That was a short one.
The silence is scary. Yeah. Dead silence. That was dead silence, okay?
All right.
No, just because your students are younger or a different generation than you are does not mean that obviously they have cell phones or more mobile devices than we were used to as kids. Doesn't mean that they're going to be experts with tech. Mm-hmm. It's our job as a teacher to be the model. So we need to be the one who knows how to troubleshoot or has tested something before deploying it in the classroom. Expecting students to do that work is really not appropriate.
Yeah. And there's a lot of information out there nowadays, Ixchell, that like younger people are actually less savvy in terms of like problem solving with technology because things are actually better designed now, and so they don't know so much how to make those adjustments or how to figure out how to solve the problems because they haven't had to do it with, you know, all of the kind of poorly designed programs that we can.
Right. And they've experienced a world with mostly tech, so they don't know what it's like to have no tech and then have to work through it, as you said.
Yeah, so those can definitely be problematic. Next one, number 12 is, and this one might be controversial, but it's...
Yeah, and make sure the recording doesn't stop
yeah,
mysteriously in the middle of this one.
Yeah, so we got stopped in the middle. The recording actually stopped us, so maybe like the tech gods are saying, don't listen to Brent when he says, stop running high flex classes. Okay, so
is that dead silence again?
No, it's playing.
I didn't hear anything.
Oh, you're not hearing the blah blah. Well, it's still going, so don't. This is way too long. What's going on? I'm not clicking this. I'm not repeating it. Okay, so this. All right, this sound is something screaming. I don't really know, but yeah, running high flex classes. So if it's not clear, high flex classes are the ones where you've got some students physically in the class and some students online. I don't remember. I know I've talked about this in different places before. I am quite opposed to this practice. I get that it can work in some cases. With the smaller the classes, the easier it is possibly to do this. But overall, high flex is an inequitable practice, right? You're not going to be giving as much attention to one group of students, and that's almost inevitably going to be the students that are on, for example, Zoom, while you're walking around the class, helping the students that are physically there and present in front of you. You will also be able to better pick up on the voices of the students that are in the room rather than the ones that are online. Otherwise, you're putting on your headphones and you're then ignoring students that are, you know, the other way around. Maybe you're not even putting on headphones, but you just can't hear the speakers are muted. I don't know. There's all sorts of potential problems running between the two. Student or teachers, I just want to point out, teachers can be successful at some levels of high flex, but it's so much more work for the teachers to do that too. And so I always say, like, if you're teaching a high flex class, you should get paid twice as much for it because you're doing twice the amount of work to make it work if you're trying to do it properly. So inequitable, disadvantages certain students, sets up all sorts of problems. The technology, the massive bandwidth we really would need to make this successful just isn't really there. And so for me, I'm going to say stop talking about high flex. Just get it off of your radar.
And the scariest of all teacher practices that should be stopped is number 13. Asking, does everyone understand?
Okay.
So, this makes the assumption that students who are being quiet and just nodding, that they understand what you're talking about. And there are so many reasons why students could just simply be agreeing with the teacher. Some of them may be cultural. It's not polite to disagree with the teacher. Some of them may be embarrassed because maybe they think everybody else understands. So why should they show that they don't understand and slow down, the teacher? Or it could be that they just don't want to slow the teacher down, or don't want to disappoint the teacher, or feel like the teacher wasn't effective, make the teacher feel like they weren't effective. And so simply asking that close-ended question it's just scary. Just stop doing it. Stop. Yeah. There are so many more ways of checking for understanding. And I have caught myself doing it sometimes. And so I have to remember to, okay, if I'm going to say, does everyone understand? And they say yes, I have to say right after that, all right, let's see, show me that you understand in another way, because it just maybe a habit of us saying it. And so habits are hard to break. So the more you're aware of it, the less likely you are to repeat it.
Yeah. So my version of that is, does that make sense, right? Which I know
Oh,
I'm
yeah.
still guilty
Are we on the
of.
same page?
Yeah, and then it's kind of
You're
like,
good? Are you good?
are you good? Everybody okay? Yeah, ready to go. And then it's like, and part of it is theoretically, it's like the teacher is kind of saying, okay, we're ready to move on to the next thing, right? We have time limits and we need to get to the next thing, and so I can't spend another 5 minutes answering questions. But
And the
maybe
students can read that, yeah.
Right, yeah. So maybe you need to. There's also assumptions that like the students who are quiet and kind of like do good jobs, like they're sitting in the back nodding, and it's like, okay, they get it, right? And it's like, well, do they really get it? So I like the version of it that is, what questions do you have, right?
Yes.
So
What questions do you have?
And that's
What questions do you have? Yeah.
That's the classic way to spin it and to make sure. And so you can say like, okay, we'll move on to the next activity after I've answered 3 questions or something like that, right? So,
And if you already know that you have a class of maybe the chemistry doesn't gel well, or they're, because the personalities tend to be shyer or quiet, or it's a different cultural or whatever background, just say, okay, I'll take one question from each one, take some time, write it down, because that also now gives the student a chance to think of the question and not be put on the spot, which is pretty scary.
can be, absolutely, yeah.
Do you understand, Brent? Does that make sense? We're on the same page about that.
Yeah.
Okay, well, moving on. Please don't do that. All right, it is time for our fun finds, and it is Hispanic Heritage Month. And so I have and it's also, it kind of goes along with also Native American or Indigenous Peoples Recognition Month in many places. So I chose a playlist on Spotify, and this is a Pirequa playlist, and you'll get it on the show notes. In the show notes, this is indigenous music from Michoacan, Mexico, and there are songs being sung in a language called Tarasco. So,
Cool. Awesome.
can you say that?
Tarasco?
Pirequa.
Pirequa?
Ah, pretty good. Proud of you.
Thank you. Yes, teacher. Yeah, and Indigenous Peoples Day. I was talking about this with a colleague. You remember we used to have Columbus Day off, and then now that they switched it to Indigenous Peoples Day.
Wait a minute. We still have Columbus Day off here in my state.
Oh. Do you guys get to call it Indigenous Peoples Day, or do you have to call it
No,
Columbus Day?
we call it Columbus Day, and we got it off. So, yeah.
Okay, well, in California, we switched it. So it's not much better that we call it now Indigenous Peoples Day, but we stopped giving the day off for people. So it's like, well, wait a second. Anyways, it's its own conversation. Inequities abound. My fun find, so Ixchell, I'm not sure. So with that earlier conversation about, getting rid of social media on the phone, I have a lot more free time that I'm just not watching dumb videos on.
Rediscovered yourself.
Yeah. So I started playing guitar. I picked it up about 20 years after the first time I picked it up. More than 20. No, it's been like 25. 25. Yeah, I was like a teenager when I was trying to play a little bit when I was younger. Anyways, I'm like, okay, it is time. Like I want to have a hobby that I can just kind of pursue for the rest of my life. And so I picked up guitar, totally terrible at it at this point, but I will be working on it. But I found this app called Musician. It's very popular, but basically what it does is it turns playing music into a video game, right? And so it does like all these things. It's like Guitar Hero. So you play the chords and it tells you strummed it right, or if you're picking and you're like picking and trying to play along with different songs or whatever. Anyways, it's pretty cool. It tells you like how accurate you are, and you can kind of play through it. I want to be a little bit careful about it because I'm reading and just understanding pedagogy is like when you're playing that as a game, it's not necessarily the same thing as processing the actual the full playing. So you kind of want to treat it like practice and do some on your own where you're actively thinking through the process of playing, and then you can also use this as ways to kind of practice and build for yourself. So but it is great. It's pretty fun. And if you're thinking about picking up an instrument, I think it's got piano, guitar, banjo, bass, ukulele.
That's cool. I was about to ask that. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's got a few different ones on there, and then like depending on the levels, like I'm I'm starting off obviously as a total beginner, and so I'm just kind of trying to learn some basic chords and basic techniques and things like that. But then it grows as your abilities grow to us, so it gets harder and harder as you keep going. So if you're thinking about picking up an instrument, one way to support that might be Musician. Oh, I'm gonna point out, I think it's a little expensive for like a year's subscription, something like $120 or something like that. But then I thought, like, how much is a single guitar lesson? It's like $50 or $60, right? Or something like that. So depending, again, it could be $20, but even still, it'd be like a month worth of lessons. And here you get to do it you get a whole year's worth for that price. So once you start figuring out like how you're comparing the prices, it's actually not too bad a deal.
Very cool.
Yeah.
All right, it is time to wrap up. Please leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or share the show with your colleagues. We really do enjoy hearing back from people who found us. You could tag us on social media. Who knows? You might be our next guest.
Yeah. For show notes and other episodes, you can find our show at diesel.org/72. And of course, you can listen to us at Voice Ed Canada. That's voiced.ca. We are on Twitter. You can find the show at DieselPod, and you can find me at Brent G. Warner.
You can find me at Ixy_Pixie. That's IXY_PIXY.
In English, the scariest of all languages. Thank you is thank you. So thank you for tuning in to the Diesel Podcast.
Thank you.